On this episode of the Small Triumph Sports Library and Archives channel, part one of a two-part annual update on my 1969 Triumph GT6 Plus project. So in this episode, I'm going to cover some of the little projects that I took on over the winter and through late spring. I'm also going to provide a brief update, if you want to call it that, on my seized engine. Before I get there, though, I do want to say just briefly, I am offering this. This is my first major restoration project. As I've talked about previously, I have some experience with some things. I'm not an expert. I do get in over my head from time to time. I've certainly experienced some humbling moments this summer, which I'll talk about primarily in part two of my update on my recent work on my car. But I am, very open to constructive criticism and advice. I'm putting this out there in the hopes that, I'm offering something that may be of interest or of help to others, but also keenly aware that I need help sometimes. And interaction on the channel is something that is important to me. I'm learning. Sometimes I think about calling my channel Learning About Triumphs in Public or making mistakes about triumphs in public. But, hopefully it all, is part of a general exchange that is helpful to everyone. So that said, let me get rolling on what I want to focus on in this video. So first of all, I want to say that I did not intend and did not set out to take step-by-step photos of the work that I'm about to discuss. And so consequently, in order to cover the work that I'm going to cover in this video, I've had to go back into my photos and just pluck out the ones that best help me to illustrate what I want to talk about. So there's a little bit of randomness and some skipped steps along the way here. And that's because I just didn't take photos of all of the work. Maybe some days I would stop at the end of the day and take a shot of what I had accomplished or what have you. So that's why it's a little bit random and why some steps are being skipped. It's probably for the better because this would be even more long-winded if I had more photos. So what I decided to do in the winter is I wanted to take some of the smaller components of the car and de-rust them, clean them up, and get them painted, ready for installation at some future date. And I decided to start with the brake and clutch pedal boxes and the master cylinder brackets and that sort of thing. So the first thing that I did is I pulled these items out, I cleaned them up, and then I sandblasted them. And this is an image of the clutch pedal. And here's an image of the clutch pedal and the clutch pedal bracket after sandblasting. Regarding sandblasting, I use Eastwood's blast out of a bucket system. It has worked really well for me. Now, I use that system, I drive that system with an old Craftsman 20-gallon air compressor. It has water filtration on it, but I find that I have to put an extra water filter at the gun if I'm going to be blasting for any extended period of time, more than 10 or 15 minutes, or else water eventually gets through to the gun nozzle, and then it becomes pointless to try to blast anything. So that happens if I don't take the necessary precautions. But beyond that, the system has been really great for me for blasting small items like the one on the screen, and also blasting areas of the body where there's rust. I find sandblasting to be the best thing for just getting into nooks and crannies and trying to get rust out. Especially pitting or heavy pitting, I think sandblasting is sort of the best way to go. And again, Eastwood's blast out of bucket system has worked really well for me. I used Eastwood media for a long time. The media that they sell by the bucket, it's a little bit expensive, but it works well. I did, however, see on Ed Hollingsworth's excellent blog that he uses contractor sand for all of his sandblasting, and he sandblasts everything, sometimes multiple times in a project. And you can get sand. Sand is a lot less expensive than dedicated blast media. And so I ended up trying some really clean play sand that was around the workshop, and it worked really well. Unfortunately, I went to a big box store and bought a couple of bags of Quikrete sand, and I bought both contractor sand and play sand, and the bags that I have too many rocks in them, small rocks in them, and it's very laborious to have to strain those out in order to blast. So I need to find, and I haven't tried super hard yet, but I need to find a source of really clean sand to use for that. So here's an image of all of the brake and clutch pedal items, as well as the master cylinder brackets after sandblasting, priming, and painting. There are a few new items in that photo. So the pedal pads are new, the return springs are new, but the vast majority of the items are refreshed original items from the car. Couple of things. I again used Eastwood products for these. So after sandblasting, I used Eastwood's Duraspray 2K primer in black on everything, and then I top coated that primer with Eastwood's Underhood Low Gloss paint. So I like Eastwood's Duraspray 2K primer when it worked. I really liked it when it first came out. However, they no longer offer it, and I found out why, because the last several cans that I had either didn't spray out well, or two of them didn't spray out at all. And I contacted Eastwood, and to their credit, they told me that they no longer offer that because of quality control problems, and they took care of me. They refunded, my money and all of that. So I don't really have any complaints about it other than the delays in moving forward with, the work that I was doing. But, that worked really well for me when it worked. But it's not available anymore. And the advantage of that over their Aerospray primer is that the Aerospray, of course, has a bladder that you rupture to mix the product for painting, and it's only good for I think about 24 hours after you rupture that bladder. The Duraspray 2K was supposed to have unlimited pot life, but again, it's no longer available. Eastwood's Underhood Low Gloss Black, I think, is a really nice color for underhood items, components like this. I like the color a lot. I did use Rust-Oleum enamel on some other items, not the items in the picture here, but on some of the other items. I do think that Rust-Oleum enamel paint is harder than the Eastwood underhood paint, which becomes relevant a little bit later in the story. But these are all the components ready to be reassembled. I was pretty happy. I had to respray a couple of things for different reasons, but I was pretty happy with how everything looked at this point. I'll note that the car still had its original Delco Remy brake switch, and it tested out fine, so I decided I would go ahead and use that when I reassembled everything. Reassembling everything turned out to be an adventure, though, and I'll tell you the story, and hopefully I can help someone out there head off the problems that I experienced, and maybe somebody out there can inform me of what I could have should have done better in order to avoid the problem that I experienced. So this is the image of the clutch and brake pedals from the factory parts catalog, and this is a close-up of the items that caused me some trouble. So we have the pedal shaft there, which is number 4. There's a bushing, number 2. The pedal shaft slides through. And then there's a clip. There are 2 clips, actually. There's one that goes on either end of the pedal shaft. Before I get to the problem, I do want to mention about the bushing here, because if you look at Triumph vendors, you will see that that bushing is no longer available. However, if you search the internet forums, you will see that that is a standard size bushing, and it is available through industrial suppliers. You can even find part numbers for it. So if you need that part, that's one option on top of, making one or something like that. So do bear that in mind. My bushings were in fine shape. I didn't need to replace them, so it wasn't a problem that I had. The problem that I had was the pedal shaft and getting it clipped in on either side of the bracket. And it's very easy to do the clip on the first side. You can just push the shaft out a little bit and clip it on. And here, there in that image, it looks like a little kind of horseshoe clip, but it's really more of an E-clip on the car. But putting the first one in is easy because you can just push it out slightly and put the clip on. But the other side, you got to put the clip on with some tension, and that's where I made a mess. First, I tried to use some painter's tape, as I recall, and that didn't work at all because the clip just sort of bit right through it in no time, trying to kind of slide it across it. And then I greased up some plastic and tried to use that to slide the clip all the way up to the shaft, and I ended up pinching the plastic between the clip and the shaft, and it would not come out. And then I had to back the E-clip all the way back out. This was on the brake pedal, by the way. So when I had to back the E-clip back out, it just chewed paint off the side of the bracket, all my nice pretty paint off the side of the bracket, and made a mess. I'll stop there and show you what the sort of finished product looks like, and then I'll explain the rest. But here is the brake pedal components, all assembled, and I'm pretty happy with it. This is the side where I put the first clip on, which again, you can push the shaft out so you're not boogering up your paint. And then this is the side where I made a mess. And what I decided to do, as opposed to, taking everything back apart and sanding it down and, respraying the entire bracket, I just left it together and taped off most of the bracket, all but the area that I wanted to touch up. I sanded on a little bit, but at that point I was like, I'm not worried about it. I just want it to be covered, and I just did a little touch-up spray. And you can see I even ended up leaving a pretty hard line there where the tape was. But again, I wasn't really worried about it. This is not something that anybody's going to... I mean, don't get me wrong, it bothers me a great deal that it looks like that. But it's not something that anybody's going to see. And, in terms of uses of my time, going back and redoing all of it, and then not even knowing how much I might... mess up the paint, trying a second time, it wasn't worth it. So I just touched it up and proceeded that way. I will say this: if anybody out there knows like a great technique for inserting it that avoids this problem, I'm all ears. So please let me know. This is the clutch pedal, fully assembled. Again, I cleaned up all the hardware and all of that. Still a little bit on the fence about whether I'm going to try to do any zinc plating or anything like that of the hardware. I probably should, but we'll see. And because that'll be a whole nother adventure. But this is the clutch pedal, and the side that I put the first clip on looks nice, and the side where I put the second clip on, you can see it's not nearly as bad as the brake, but you can see I chewed some of the paint off sliding the clip in, and I just touched that one up too. That one's not as bad. It doesn't bother me as much. So I was pretty satisfied with that, beyond the areas that are imperfect from the clips. But wrap those up and put them in a box with the new brake master cylinder, the new clutch master cylinder, and the new clutch slave cylinder that I have. The original hydraulic components I hope to have rebuilt for backups at some point in the future, but a couple of years ago I went ahead and bought all of those components new, and hopefully they'll all function just fine, and I'll be good to go if I ever get to the point of installing them. Another item that I addressed is the passenger footrest for the car, and I sandblasted that and primed and painted it, and it's illustrative of the approach that I'm taking because, again, I'm trying to put together the car. I'm trying to make it nice. I want it to be, 98% original, in appearance and function and all of that. But I want it to be a driver. My goal is to drive the car. And I've very quickly realized that if I allow myself to get bogged down in every single tedious detail, I'm never going to finish the car. So with this, you can see very pitted at the bottom. It's got a few pinholes down at the bottom, but it is solid. Like, it looks like it would be flimsy, but it's not. It feels very solid. An interesting thing about that is that the floor is not very rusty at all, but this is deeply pitted. It's kind of strange. But at any rate, I could have tried to fashion a piece, shape a piece, and cut it off and patched in good metal at the bottom, but it would have taken a lot of time. And I immediately realized this is something I can pull out the car at any point and clean up, when I want to. So to me, it's something that when the car is on the road, if I want to tackle it as a weekend project or something, I can do that. I don't feel the need to, because it's perfectly functional and it's not flimsy, I don't feel compelled to perfect it right now. So I went ahead and primed and painted it, and I riveted the snap on the upper right hand corner there, and it'll go back in the car when I get to that point in the future. Hopefully not too far in the future, but I know it'll be pretty far into the future. And by the way, this is pretty boring, but just a few other little things that I took care of over the winter and into the early spring. So we have the retainer ring for the gear shift boot, the one that's under the gator that's sewn into the carpet. So it might look a little bit rusty there, but it's not. It's just been sitting in the garage collecting some dust. I sandblasted that and again primed and painted it. Also sandblasted and painted the coolant overflow bracket, and cleaned up the hardware for it, and that's of course a new bottle and cap and grommet that I purchased from the Roadster Factory a couple of years ago. One of the last things that I did is I sandblasted the water pump housing and got it nice and clean. And that was good. I went ahead and bought some engine primer and engine paint for it. And then for whatever reason, I just went and shifted to body work and just kind of left it in this state. And I need to go back. I will probably hit it with media one more time and then go ahead and prime and paint it. That's a little job that I started and haven't finished yet, but I probably will tackle it at some point in the next month or so. So I want to close this episode by talking a little bit about my engine, which at the moment is still sadly seized. When I did my updates on my summer work last year, I spent a good bit of time in episode 12 talking about the backstory with my engine. I explained how I had been a bonehead in the summer of 2020 when I got the car, and didn't immediately look at or try to turn over the engine, and I explained why. But the bottom line is I didn't actually try to turn the engine over until right before I was, after I had everything ready to pull the engine and transmission out of the car. And when I tried to turn it over then, it was clearly seized, and I assumed it probably wasn't seized that badly, so went ahead and pulled the engine and transmission out of the car, put the engine on stand, and as I explained, I was then trying to turn the engine over on the stand, and I wasn't real comfortable with it. The engine was seized, much worse than I suspected, and my efforts to turn the engine over on the stand flexed a lot. I wasn't real comfortable with that. I didn't feel like I was getting good leverage on the crankshaft. And so ultimately at the end of last summer, I ended up taking the engine, the transmission, and the drive shaft or propeller shaft and putting all of that back in the car to do one of the standard things that people do when they're trying to get an seized engine turning. And that is try to use the mass of the car to get it going. So I put everything back in the car, put the transmission in gear, and tried to rock the car back and forth. And this was completely unsuccessful, I think largely for two reasons. One is the car was already completely stripped and even had some body panels removed from it by this time. So it wasn't really a lot of heft with the car. It wasn't very helpful in that regard. And then also the tires on the car are really old. I'm sure they were manufactured in 1970 something, and they don't have a lot of grip. So consequently, when I put the transmission in gear and tried to rock the car back and forth, it really just had a tendency to hop. And so it just didn't work. So tried a couple of other little things, but in the end, what I decided to do is I purchased a spare pulley and damper assembly for the car, and with the engine still in the car, I installed that. And while I was at work last fall, my father welded up a large bar that we could bolt to the spare pulley and damper assembly, with the idea that we would try to lever that back and forth over a series of days or weeks if necessary to try to get the engine moving a little bit at a time. At least at that point, we knew that we were going to get good force on the crankshaft. And of course, the whole time, I've had something in the bores. So the bores have been soaking in something, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a moment. But we put this bar on the spare pulley and damper assembly. You can see that there, and wiggled it, daily. Just put a little pressure on it, moving it back and forth. And this ultimately didn't really seem to be doing a lot. There seemed to be a little play in the pulley and damper assembly, but couldn't really see the crankshaft moving much, if at all. Couldn't see the pistons moving. And so eventually, after a few weeks of trying to lever it back and forth and not really feeling a lot, we definitely not experiencing any real movement, we decided to go at it with a little bit of muscle, and quite simply just ended up shearing the dowels in the pulley and damper assembly. So That ended up being a failure, and also let me know that the engine is quite seized. Um, so that is a big problem. At that point, I had body work that I needed to do. I really needed to get the engine and transmission back out. I did delay on that a little bit while I was doing some other little jobs, including those that I've shown earlier in this video. But eventually I just pulled the engine and transmission and everything back out the car and put the engine back on a stand, because I realized after the giant lever didn't work, that I was probably going to have to aggressively disassemble the engine. I may end up having to sacrifice the pistons, which I'd rather not do. Now, of course, I don't expect to reuse the original pistons. My expectation all along is that I'll have to overbore things a little bit and install new pistons, but I also would rather not destroy the original pistons. However, it may prove necessary. But depending on how far I can disassemble the engine, there may be a chance to drive the pistons out the top of the engine. I've also seen people basically drill out the top of pistons and collapse them in the bores. Not sure what strategy I will need to take. However, I will say that it does look like I'm going to have to be really aggressive with this. And after the giant lever didn't work, I just decided that I was going to set things aside for a little while. The more aggressive approach is something I'm going to have to think about and explore some more. And I had other ideas about things I wanted to do in the short term. And so, put something in the bores and set the engine aside. And I will try to tackle that probably at some point in the coming months. I really feel like the engine should be salvageable, but it's going to take some serious work, and I don't know until I know. So and it nags me. That I don't know for sure the status of that block. So I'm gonna have to tackle it sooner than later, if only for some peace of mind in terms of knowing that the engine is good, or knowing that I'm gonna have to find another block. But don't think it should come to that. But it hasn't gone well so far, and I'll provide an additional update on that. Some of you may be curious about this, so I did want to cover briefly the different things that I've used to soak the bores. So I've had something in the bores of the engine for a long time, really almost the entirety of the last 3 years, and very little of it has been effective in any obvious way, and very little of it has actually gotten past the piston rings. So I think obviously the piston rings are frozen quite solidly into the bores. Probably 90% of the time over the last 3 years, I've had Marvel Mystery Oil in the bores. I did clean it out and try Croil for a week or two at some point in the process. I think, after an operation, I put PB Blaster in there at one point. I did use the 50/50 acetone ATF mix that people swear by at one point, probably a year or more ago. I actually soaked the top and the bottom. I turned the engine over and soaked the bores from the bottom with the acetone ATF mix, again with no obvious results. My father also happened to have some Superzilla around, and we tried that as well. But the penetrance, again, maybe they're slowly helping in some fashion, or maybe they're doing more than I can tell, but haven't yielded any obvious results overall. So the engine has been set aside, and I'll provide another update when I finally go in and try to aggressively get at that problem. So that's it for this particular episode. I do have the second part of my update on my summer work. And this involves the work that I did on the body and the chassis. And as usual, it involves me struggling and making mistakes. But it is my hope that in sharing those kinds of things, people can kind of learn from me. And as I said earlier, I always like to get feedback. A lot of you out there may have more experience than I do and may be able to help me, or at the very least, if it's something that I've already done, can help somebody who has some of this work in their future. So I hope to be back with part 2 of this work update soon. In the meantime, really, thank you for watching, and please take care.